Welcome everyone. Today we are going to learn about two special type of phosphoglycerides. Now in my previous video I have mentioned that phosphoglycerides is a major type of lipids present in the plasma membrane. In this video I will talk about two special type of phosphoglycerides. One is called Plasmalogen and another is called Cardiolipin. Now in my previous video, phosphoglycerides, I have mentioned that phosphoglycerides contain four components. First component of the phosphoglycerides, that is the common for all, that is glycerol. Glycerol is the backbone of phosphoglycerides. This glycerol molecule contains three carbon, just three carbon. So first carbon, second carbon and third carbon. With the first carbon and second carbon, two fatty acid chains are attached, and with the third carbon a phosphate group is actually attached. This is the basic structure of phosphoglycerides, and with the phosphate group one head group is actually attached. Alcohol head group is attached. Now in case of normal phosphoglycerides, the bond between first carbon and the fatty acid, the bond between second carbon and the fatty acids, and the bond between third carbon and phosphate group, all are ester in nature. Remember this, ester bond. But in case of plasmalogen, the bond in this first carbon and the fatty acid is ether in nature. Ether bond, that means COC bond. But the bond between second carbon and the fatty acids is ester. Third carbon and phosphate is ester. So only the first carbon and the first fatty acids is ether in nature. Now still now we don't know the significance of this special category of phosphoglycerides, plasmalogen, but scientists has discovered that these fatty acids are actually particularly abundant in brain and heart tissue. So brain and heart tissue contain abundant of plasmalogen. So there is only a small change in the basic phosphoglyceride structure, that is the first bond between the first carbon and the fatty acids is ether in nature. Now how cardiolipin looks? At first I want to mention that the chemical name or nomenclature of cardiolipin is actually diphosphatidylglycerol. Okay, diphosphatidylglycerol. Now I have mentioned in my phosphoglycerides video that phosphatidylglycerol is actually one kind of phosphoglycerides. How it looks, let me draw. So phosphatidylglycerols look like this. Here glycerol is present because glycerol is the backbone, so glycerol will remain always. And with the first carbon and second carbon and third carbon, with the first carbon one fatty acid chain is attached, with the second carbon fatty acid chain is attached, similar like this. With the third carbon one phosphate group will be attached, so that's why it's called phosphatidylglycerol. One phosphate group will be attached and a head group will be glycerol. That's why it's called phosphatidylglycerol. The name of the head group actually determine the name of the phosphoglycerides. Like I have mentioned, the head group of phosphoglycerides could be choline, ethanolamine, it could be serine or inositol. Okay, so according to the name of the head group, the phosphoglyceride is called phosphatidylcholine, phosphatidylethanolamine, phosphatidylserine and phosphatidylinositol. The head group can also be glycerol. Another glycerol could be a head group. So when a glycerol, I'm writing here just G, is present, so we call this structure phosphatidylglycerol. Now cardiolipin is called di. Di means two, so there will be similar structure like this So two similar phosphoglycerides will be there. So in cardiolipin, there is another glycerol molecules is present that is acts as a backbone. With the first carbon of this glycerol and the second carbon, with the first and second carbon, two fatty acids are attached. Two fatty acids are attached. And with the third carbon, a phosphate group will be attached. Okay. So basically, this structure is phosphatidylglycerol. This structure is also a phosphatidylglycerol. Now, with a common glycerol, these two molecules are attached. Let's suppose the glycerol here is the head group, but this glycerol is actually attaches with this structure and with this structure. When two phosphatidylglycerol are actually present, basically the head group is common, then we call diphosphatidylglycerol, and this is the chemical name of cardiolipin. So the structure of cardiolipin looks like this. Now, cardiolipin is a characteristics of bacterial plasma membrane. So the bacterial plasma membrane contains the cardiolipin. Another point you can remember, that is this cardiolipin actually synthesized or actually generate in the inner mitochondrial membrane in case of eukaryotic cells. Inner mitochondrial membrane. Okay. And another important point we have to remember, that this cardiolipins are actually very localized and confined to the inner mitochondrial membrane. So it is localized, or you can say confined to the inner mitochondrial membrane. What does it mean? It means that this is the factory site of the cardiolipin in case of eukaryotic cells. Inner mitochondria membrane is the factory where cardiolipin are generated. But in case of cardiolipin, these molecules are actually very little amount of cardiolipin is actually exported to the other organelles. Let me explain. As you can see, phosphoglycerides like phosphatidylcholine, ethanolamine, serine and inositols, these phosphoglycerides are actually synthesized in the endoplasmic reticulum. This is the factory site. But from the endoplasmic reticulum, these lipids, phosphoglycerides, actually transported to the other organelles or the plasma membrane. But in case of cardiolipin, these cardiolipins are generated in the inner mitochondrial membrane, but it is localized or confined. A very little amount of cardiolipin is actually exported to the other organelles. So it is very localized and confined to the inner mitochondrial membrane. Another important point you can remember about cardiolipin is that it acts as a glue. It acts as a glue that holds the very important proteins complex called electron transport chain. So it acts as a glue to hold the electron transport chain. Another important point we can remember, that defects in an enzyme that actually determine the structure of fatty acids. So if there is any defect in an enzyme that determines this structure of the fatty acids, then one human X-linked disease, one human X-linked disease is observed, and this disease is actually called Barth syndrome. B-A-R-T-H' Barth syndrome. So if there is any defects in an enzyme that determines the structure of fatty acids, then a human that cause human X-linked syndrome or disease, that's called Barth syndrome. Now, what are the symptoms of this syndrome or disease? So as you can see, it's the name mentioned that cardio, that means it's present in the heart muscles. So symptoms is defects in heart and skeletal muscle. So there will be defect in this syndrome, Barth syndrome, in the heart and skeletal muscles. Another problem can rise, that is growth retardations. growth retardation.